I left the engine running. She still has no idea I'm gone. The engine was still running when I walked away. I don't know why I left it like that. Maybe because part of me thought I might come back. Maybe because I couldn't bear to hear the silence if I turned it off. 12 years. Gone in under a minute. Not with a fight. Not with a scream. Just a folded piece of paper, a line of digits in bold, and a phone that slipped out of my hand into the passenger seat like it was tired too. Rafe had just texted me. "Dad, are you picking us up?" I stared at the message until my vision blurred. That word, Dad. That word used to mean everything to me. Now it felt like a cruel joke typed out by a stranger. Because I'm not their dad. Not legally. Not biologically. Not even emotionally anymore, if I'm being honest. It's like the second I saw those results, something cracked open inside me. And everything I thought I was, father, husband, protector, just spilled out like cheap gas onto the floor. They say there are 5 stages of grief. I didn't get past stage 1. I didn't even try to climb the ladder. I just sat there, stuck, frozen in the middle of a parking garage 5 levels underground, trying not to scream. How do you tell a 12-year-old girl you're not her father? How do you tell your son he was born of a lie? How do you tell your wife you know? You don't. You don't tell them anything. You just walk. I left my phone, my keys, the cinnamon gum I always chewed when I was nervous. I left everything but the air in my lungs, and even that felt borrowed. She probably thinks I'm still at the hardware store. Maybe grabbing milk. Maybe fixing something for my mother. The truth is, I've been gone for 4 hours. I haven't blinked. I haven't breathed. I've just drifted. And I don't think I'm coming back. The glove box held the truth. And I left it there. I ended up walking into a train station I hadn't been to in over a decade. It looked exactly the same. Still smelled like burnt pretzels and wet concrete. I sat on a cold bench near track 6, just watching people come and go. Families. Couples. Strangers. None of them knew that somewhere in the 5th level of a parking garage, there was a car idling with my entire life sitting inside it. My phone, buzzing occasionally. My wedding band, which I had taken off just 5 minutes before and tucked into the glove box. Right next to the DNA test results. I didn't need to leave a note. The numbers were enough. Sylvie would find them. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe she'd call the police first, thinking something happened to me. I almost hoped she would. I almost hoped she'd panic. Just for a moment. Just to taste that fear I've been choking on for weeks. It's strange what betrayal does to you. It doesn't scream. It doesn't stab. It just rearranges everything inside you until you're a stranger to yourself. I didn't feel like Corbin anymore. I didn't feel like a man. I felt like a placeholder, something temporary that was used until the real plan came along. And the worst part? I started to question if any of it had ever been real. Were the kids' names we chose together, or names she always planned? Were the bedtime stories something she smiled at because she loved me, or because she pitied me? Did she laugh at me? Alone? With him? I kept thinking about little moments. About how Rafe has that dimple on his left cheek. The one I always told people he got from me, even though I didn't have it. How Aloan is left-handed and I used to say it skipped a generation. How they both love jazz, even though I can't stand it. I made it all fit. I filled in the blanks because I wanted the picture to be beautiful. But it wasn't real. None of it was. And what did she think I'd do when I found out? Hug her. Thank her for the privilege of being fooled. Keep pretending? Keep funding this illusion until the kids graduated and forgot me completely? I'm not angry. Not really. That's the strangest part. I expected rage. I thought I'd scream, punch a wall, drive until I hit the edge of the state. But instead, there's just this quiet ache. Like when you wake up and realize a dream was better than your life, and you can't go back to sleep. I watched an old man drop his coffee on the train platform. He just sighed and walked away. Didn't even try to clean it up. Just moved on. And I thought, maybe that's what I'm doing. Maybe I'm just walking away from the spill. No one noticed the man who vanished at 4:13 p.m. Somewhere between the second and third train arrival, I realized that not a single person had looked me in the eye. Not the girl with the blue headphones. Not the couple arguing about directions. Not even the station worker who swept past me twice. I was invisible. And for the first time in my life, I didn't mind it. I wasn't Corbin the husband. I wasn't Corbin the father. I was just a man on a bench with nothing but time and a jacket that still smelled like our laundry detergent. At exactly 4:13 p.m., I stood up and walked to the ticket machine. I didn't have a plan. I just picked a city I hadn't visited in 20 years, Ridgemont. and bought a one-way ticket with the emergency cash I kept in my glove box. Funny, I always thought I'd use that money to buy a surprise gift for Sylvie. An anniversary necklace maybe. Something with the kids' initials. Now it was buying me an escape from everything that bore those same initials. I didn't call anyone. Didn't write some dramatic goodbye. That kind of closure is for people who matter. People who still have a role to play in the story. I was no longer part of the cast. I was just the fool who memorized the wrong script. I boarded the train and sat by the window. No one took the seat next to me. I watched the city smear past in streaks of glass and noise. Buildings I'd once driven by with my daughter in the back seat, singing along to off-key Disney songs. Bridges I'd kissed my wife beneath during long-forgotten dates. All of it fading like a dream I wasn't invited back into. My thoughts twisted back to the night it all started unraveling. The moment I asked Sylvie about the blood type discrepancy, and she didn't blink. She didn't even fake confusion. She just tilted her head and said, "Are you sure it matters?" That line, "Are you sure it matters?" I've replayed that sentence 1,000 times. Not because of what it meant, but because of how calmly she said it. Like I'd caught her borrowing my razor, not lying to me for over a decade. Does it matter? It matters to the man who got up for midnight feedings, who held her hand during labor, who sold his vintage guitar to cover a private school deposit. It matters when you've built your entire identity around a truth someone else fabricated with a smile. I leaned back against the train seat, my chest tight. I thought I had cried all my tears in that garage, but something new started burning behind my eyes. Not sadness, not grief, humiliation. I had become the background character in my own life, the placeholder dad, the emotional body double. I don't know how long I stared out the window before I saw her name light up on the screen above the door. Incoming call, Sylvie. Somehow the number had found its way to this new phone. I had bought it from a kiosk at the station just before boarding. No contacts, no history, just a clean slate and a random prepaid number. But she still found me. She always does. I didn't answer. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, and then tossed the phone into the empty seat beside me. Then, for the first time all day, I whispered aloud what I hadn't been able to say even in my own head. I don't think I want to go back. And I meant it. The letter I was never meant to see. The train rocked gently as the city dissolved behind me, replaced by empty fields and blinking silos that looked like lonely towers holding up the sky. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel out here, miles away from everything familiar. Relief? Freedom? Clarity? Instead, all I felt was this strange hollowness, like I'd chewed through the last piece of flavor in my life, and now I was stuck with a mouth full of nothing. I was halfway to Ridgemont when I remembered the envelope. Not the DNA test. That one was burned into my memory like a brand. No, this was different. This one was pale blue, worn at the corners, and hidden behind our old tax documents in the file drawer at home. I had found it by accident a few days before the results came in. I remember how it had no return address. Just Sylvie's name written in a script I didn't recognize. I wasn't supposed to open it. I could feel that. But I did. And now I can't unsee what was inside. The letter wasn't addressed to her. It was to him, the real father. The man who had apparently vanished years ago and left Sylvie with 2 children and a lie too big to carry alone. Except it wasn't framed like that. It was warm, intimate, written like they were co-conspirators in some secret they both agreed to keep. She wrote things like, "They'll never know unless you tell them." And Corbin still thinks Maddie has his nose. It's almost funny now. Almost funny now. That phrase sent a wave of something I can only describe as erosion through my spine. Like parts of me were being worn away just reading it. And the worst part? The letter was dated 3 years ago. That meant she'd been in contact with him. Long after our kids were born. Long after I had paid for the braces, the camp trips, the hospital visits. He had vanished, sure, but not entirely. He had been a ghost with a pen. And Sylvie? She had been keeping him alive with every lie she told me in the kitchen, in bed, in the way she said, "You're such a good father." The train slowed as it passed through a small town. A boy stood on the platform holding his dad's hand, laughing at something. I felt my stomach twist. It should have made me angry, but it didn't. It made me ache. That boy would grow up knowing who he was. And the man holding his hand would grow old knowing he had built something real. I wanted that. I thought I had that. I looked back at the phone still sitting on the seat beside me. Another missed call. Another voicemail. Another reminder that the woman who shared my bed for 12 years had also shared her truths with someone else, someone I would never meet, but who had left fingerprints all over the life I thought was mine. And then I made a decision. I pulled out the letter again. I read it once more, slower this time. Every word etched itself into my memory like a scar. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in the hotel envelope I had pocketed earlier, and addressed it to myself. Not my home, not my wife, not even to the lawyer I had half a mind to call. To me. Because before I could burn it, I needed to feel it one last time. I needed to remember what it felt like to look directly at the truth without flinching. To know what it means to be the man on the outside. The man who stayed. The man who wasn't chosen. I dropped it into a mailbox just before the next stop. And just like that, I gave myself a reminder that I existed. Even if no one else remembered. She wasn't supposed to be there. Ridgemont hadn't changed. That was the most unsettling part. I hadn't stepped foot in this town since my 20s, yet every cracked sidewalk, every faded mural, every rusted bench was still right where I left it. It was like stepping into a photo that hadn't aged, while I had. The air even smelled the same, like pine needles and old rain soaked into brick. I didn't come here for nostalgia. I came here because it was the only place I knew that didn't know me anymore. Or so I thought. I checked into a roadside motel off Route 18. One of those places where the front desk is protected by a scratched-up plexiglass barrier and the clerk doesn't ask questions. I paid in cash. No ID. No signature. Just a keycard that barely worked and a room with a TV from 2004. The bed creaked when I sat down. The silence was heavy, but it was mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were eating each other. I kept picturing the kids at the dinner table, waiting. Sylvie pacing. The calls I wasn't answering. The search that was probably beginning. But I didn't feel guilt. Not the kind you'd expect. It was something else. Like watching your own funeral through a window and realizing no one really knew you anyway. At around 2 a.m., I walked to the corner store near the gas station, the kind that sells expired snacks and off-brand shampoo. I just needed something. Noise, caffeine, a distraction, anything. I grabbed a bottle of cold brew and a bag of those stale peanut clusters I used to like before I grew up and got tired of sugar. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the back of the store. Same maroon coat. Same posture. Sylvie. Or at least, I thought it was her. My brain froze. Heart. Gone. Just silence. That terrifying silence when you're not sure if you're dreaming, hallucinating, or being hunted. She turned slightly. Her profile lit by the flickering fridge light. No, not Sylvie. It wasn't her. It was someone who looked like her. Younger. Maybe 5 years younger than when I met Sylvie. But the resemblance, it was uncanny. My hands started shaking and the cold brew slipped, hit the floor, exploded everywhere. She turned toward the sound, startled, and our eyes met for a second that lasted forever. She smiled politely. Just a stranger acknowledging a mess. But I couldn't breathe. She had his eyes. Not mine. Not even close. I don't know what made me do it, but I followed her outside. Not like a stalker, more like a man chasing a ghost. She walked calmly, earbuds in, headed toward the south end of town. I kept my distance, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why her face haunted me more than the nightmares I'd been running from. And then she stopped, right outside the old community center. I hadn't been there since 2008, back when I volunteered to help run open mics and kids' art days. It was boarded up now, the paint peeling, but still standing. She sat on the steps like she belonged there, and then pulled out a notebook. I couldn't stop myself. I walked closer, slow, like every footstep might collapse the ground beneath me. Hey, I said, my voice dry. She looked up, curious, not scared. Hi. I gestured to the building. You waiting for someone? She shook her head. No. I just come here to write. It's quiet. There was a pause. Too long. My head was buzzing. What's your name? I asked. She hesitated for just a second. Lyra. My stomach dropped. That name. That name. The name Sylvie once told me she wanted to name a third child, if we ever had one. A name I laughed off and forgot. But she didn't forget. I thanked her, turned, and walked away. Fast. I didn't know what I had just seen, or who I had just seen. But something was wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. And for the first time since I left, I realized. I hadn't escaped the truth. I had stepped into a place where it had been hiding all along. Her notebook should have stayed closed. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying that name, Lyra, like it was a curse I'd accidentally spoken aloud. The way she looked at me, not just politely, but knowingly, lingered in my chest like static electricity. It wasn't just resemblance anymore. It was something deeper, like echoes of a life that shouldn't overlap with mine. I tried convincing myself it was coincidence. Maybe Sylvie wasn't the only woman who liked poetic names. Maybe I was exhausted, hallucinating patterns that weren't there. But the way my hands trembled told me I already knew better. By sunrise, I was back at the community center. The air was sharp, the kind that stings your lungs when you breathe too fast. I didn't see her at first. The steps were empty, dew glistening on the cracked concrete. I almost turned around until I saw it. A small, black notebook sitting on the railing, pages fluttering in the morning wind. I shouldn't have touched it. Every part of me knew that. But I did. The first page wasn't a diary. It was a letter, written neatly, as if it had been copied and rewritten a dozen times until it looked right. I started reading. The handwriting was painfully familiar. Not Sylvie's, but close. Softer. Younger. The letter began. I think I finally understand why she never told him. I froze. My throat tightened. I flipped the page. Another line. Some truths are too heavy to give away. They only make the person you love sink with you. I read faster. The words blurred. The next line said something that made my stomach twist into knots. She said he'd find me one day, if he ever really looked. But not to tell him who I was, only to listen. I stopped breathing. My pulse was a hammer in my ears. Who was she talking about? Who was he? I turned the page again, desperate for something that made sense. The next part was written in a rushed scrawl, like someone had been crying while writing it. If you're reading this, I guess she was right. You did find me, and I'm sorry for what that means. I stepped back, gripping the notebook so hard the paper creased under my fingers. The world felt suddenly tilted, wrong. I glanced toward the trees behind the building, half expecting to see her there, but there was nothing. Just the sound of a train horn in the distance, the same one I'd arrived on. My vision tunneled. I needed answers. Real ones. I ran back to the motel, the notebook tucked under my jacket like a stolen secret. I locked the door and spread the pages across the bed. There were sketches between the letters, drawings of a man and two children holding hands, standing beside a woman whose face had been left blank. There were details too specific to ignore. A yellow house with chipped paint, a red swing set, a silver SUV. My house. My car. My life. But drawn from someone else's memory. That's when I saw it. On the back cover, faintly penciled in, were numbers, coordinates. I typed them into my phone, and my stomach sank when I saw the result. The location was only a few miles from where I'd grown up. A small clearing near the river bend, a place I hadn't visited since I was 17. Back then, it was where I took Sylvie on our first real date. Where she told me secrets she swore no one else knew. Where she made me promise I'd never leave her. I thought about burning the notebook right then, pretending I'd never seen it, never met that girl, never left home. But curiosity is a cruel disease. It eats through pain, guilt, logic, everything. And by the time I realized it, I was already in my car, driving toward the river. The morning light cut through the trees as the road narrowed. I knew this path by heart. The bends, the slope, the way the grass always seemed too tall no matter how many years passed. When I finally reached the clearing, I stopped the car and stepped out, the notebook still clutched in my hand. The air was still, too still. The kind of silence that feels like someone's holding their breath just out of sight. And then I saw the flowers. Fresh ones, laid neatly on a flat stone near the riverbank. And taped to the stone was a photo, one I'd never seen before. It was Sylvie, holding a baby. But the man beside her wasn't me. The face beside her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The photo had been in the sun too long, the colors warped, the edges curling like burnt paper. But even through the fading, the truth was clear. Sylvie stood barefoot by the same river I was standing next to now, a baby tucked in her arms, her hair windblown and free. And next to her, smiling like he owned the world, was a man I had never seen before. His arm was around her waist. His hand rested on the back of the baby's head in the kind of gesture you don't fake, the kind that belongs to fathers, not strangers. I picked it up, careful not to smudge it, though my fingers were already trembling. My brain tried to rewrite it instantly. Maybe it was before me, maybe it was a cousin, maybe she'd lied to someone else, maybe this wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew this wasn't before me. The baby couldn't have been more than 6 months old. And 12 years ago, Sylvie and I were already married. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at that photo with the sound of the river swallowing everything else. Birds, cars, wind gone. Just that low murmur of moving water and the unbearable weight of recognition. The man had something familiar about him. Not his face exactly, but the posture, the shape of his hands, the way he leaned toward her like he'd done it 1,000 times before. I couldn't place it, but something about him itched at the edges of my memory, like a dream that slips away when you wake but leaves a bruise on your mind. Then I noticed the corner of another photo sticking out from under the flowers. I pulled it free. This one was newer, clearer. It showed the same spot, same stone, same river, but this time it was just the man. Alone, kneeling, a small bunch of daisies in his hand. Someone had written on the back in pen, the ink smudged by water. "She said you'd come here someday." My chest locked up. The notebook, the coordinates, the girl named Lyra. Everything started to connect like bad wiring sparking to life all at once. I dropped the photo and stepped back, feeling dizzy. The sunlight seemed too bright now, sharp, surgical. I could almost hear Sylvie's voice behind me, calm and measured, the way it had been that night when I asked her about the blood test. "Does it matter?" she had said. Maybe it hadn't mattered to her. Maybe because she knew this man, whoever he was still out here somewhere, leaving notes in notebooks and flowers by rivers. I walked back toward the car, but stopped halfway. There was a sound behind me, the crunch of leaves, slow and deliberate. My heart climbed into my throat. I turned around. Nothing. Just the shimmer of water and trees swaying like they were whispering secrets to each other. But then, faintly, I caught sight of movement on the far bank. A figure, standing still, watching. He was too far away to see clearly, but he wasn't moving. Not waving, not running, just standing. I blinked, and for a moment I thought the world had folded in on itself because it was him, the man from the photo. Same stance, same frame, same stillness that radiated ownership. I didn't move. Neither did he. The only thing separating us was that narrow stretch of water, glinting like glass under the sun. After what felt like hours, he turned and walked away. Slow, unhurried, like he knew I wouldn't follow. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. Instead, I looked down again at the flowers on the stone, and for the first time noticed the small engraving beneath them. My name, Corbin. I stumbled backward, my breath stuttering. The letters weren't carved deep, just enough to catch the light, but they were there. It wasn't a grave. It was more like a mark, a claim, a warning. And the worst part wasn't seeing my name carved into stone. It was realizing I didn't know if it was meant for me or for me. Because when I looked closer, there were 3 smaller marks etched beneath it. Not letters, just symbols. Circles. 1 larger, 2 smaller. A family. My family. Except now, I wasn't sure whose. I still don't know if I was a father, but I know I was a dad. I didn't go back to the motel. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly for an hour, letting the winding roads carry me through the edges of the town, past places I hadn't thought about in years. The old movie house, the closed-down diner, the school track where I once broke my wrist trying to impress someone I barely remember now. And then, without really planning it, I ended up at the library. It was the only place that still felt like it belonged to no one and everyone at once. I parked outside, turned off the engine, and sat in silence. That photo, the engraving, the stranger at the river, none of it made sense, and somehow, all of it did. Maybe it wasn't meant to be solved like a puzzle. Maybe it was just a reminder that the past is always bigger than we realize, that the people we think we know are carrying rooms of themselves we'll never enter. Inside the library, the air was cool and smelled like old pages and forgotten voices. I found an empty table near the back. For a while, I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I looked older than I remembered, but also lighter. Like something inside me had finally stopped clenching its fists. That's when I saw her. Lyra. She walked through the doors, hood up, earbuds in, a stack of books hugged to her chest. She didn't see me at first, but I watched her move, calm, focused, free. And I realized something I hadn't dared to accept until right then. She wasn't mine, but she wasn't his either. She was her own. I stood up slowly and walked over, keeping a careful distance. She noticed me just before I reached her table. Her face didn't show fear, just recognition. Like she'd been expecting this moment eventually. "You left your notebook?" I said, offering it to her. She took it gently, eyes flicking down to the cover. "You read it?" "I did." She nodded, not ashamed. "Just honest." "Then you know." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I know enough." A pause. "Heavy. Safe. I'm not here to accuse you," I added. "Or your mother. Or anyone. I just needed to see the end of something. And maybe the beginning of something else." Lyra looked at me for a long time. Her expression unreadable at first, then softening. "She never stopped loving you," she said quietly, "even when she didn't know how to show it." I nodded. "And I never stopped being their dad, even when I wasn't." There it was. The thing I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Pride. Not for what I thought I was, but for what I gave. Years of love, stability, bedtime stories, scraped knees, piano recitals, dentist appointments, nightmares soothed. You can't fake that. You can't fake showing up. "You're allowed to be angry," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. I admitted. "But now, I think I'm just tired of being lost." She gave a faint smile, then stopped running. I laughed softly. It sounded strange, like it didn't belong to the man I'd been for the past 2 weeks. But maybe it belonged to the man I could still become. We didn't talk long. She had studying to do. I had 1,000 unsent messages waiting on my old phone. But before she left, she turned back to me and asked something I didn't expect. "Can I send them your number?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Only if they ask for it." She smiled again, and this time, it reached her eyes. Later that day, I drove home. Not for Sylvie, not even for answers, just for the kids. For Rafe's sarcastic jokes. For Maddie's obsession with old detective novels. For every moment I'd already lived with them, and maybe a few more I still could. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. But there was a photo taped to the fridge. One of the kids, drawn in crayon. A new one. On the back, in blocky handwriting, were 3 words. "We miss you." I dropped my bag, sat down in the middle of the kitchen floor, and for the first time in weeks, I felt whole again.